In episode 5, the story begins at Sakura's school late that afternoon. So there's Sakura, and as I mentioned before in the last episode, she had transformed 3 star cars so far. And now she's working on her home ec project, which is the stuffed bear. And as we mentioned before, she was going to plan on giving it to Julian, who's her brother's best friend. Well, good news, her project is finished. But now here comes the bad news. She looks at the stuffed bear and then complains to herself that no matter how many times she tries, it just ended up like Hero. Well, to make herself feel better, what did Sakura do? She decides to write a letter to Miss Mackenzie as she did just 4 episodes ago to ask how she's been and how everything is going and to explain what had happened. And in flashback, we go back to an episode ago, the previous night in downtown Reddington, where something or someone has caused Lee to be possessed until she found out that there were threads everywhere. Remember, those were the same spools of thread that Eli bought back at the craft shop within the last episode. That was until, thanks to Sakura, good news for her, she uses her Sword Star card to break the spell, by cutting the threads, of course. So anyway, back to the present. Sakura continues to explain that there's only one problem. She is still not sure who's behind all those disturbances and why. But one thing is clear. According to what Sakura says in the letter to Miss Mackenzie in her case, that whoever's doing it is very powerful. And of course, both herself and Carol can really sense it. Also in Miss Mackenzie's letter, according to what Sakura says in her case, that from now on she's bringing her remaining cards that she hasn't transformed yet, because lately she's been having these strange dreams. So long story short, after Sakura's been thinking about what's going to happen next, and that's when Eli said hello to her when he approached her. Now Eli can tell that there was something off with Sakura, so he's asking her, "You're not nervous, are you?" "Of course not," Sakura says. "Not at all." So just like before, Sakura allows Eli to sit next to her and she's explaining that she is writing a letter to Miss Mackenzie, the teacher that they had about a year ago. Then Sakura told Eli, "Well, it's a shame that she moved away because you would have liked her too," she said. So although curious, Eli took a peek at Sakura's stuffed bear, but she made her case to say, "I'm not quite done yet." So Eli says, "So this is what you bought at the craft store?" Not only did Sakura say that she did, but Eli wanted to know if he could have a look at it. So Sakura not only agreed, but she says, "Promise me one thing. Don't laugh at it, okay?" So Sakura agreed to give Eli the teddy bear that she had made and promised her that he wouldn't laugh at it or anything else. And then he pleaded his case to say, "I'm not very good with home ec projects myself," he said. Of course, Eli was more than happy to give her a few pointers, a few tips, if you will. So he says, "I can lend you a little secret. Those ears that you just did, they need to be a little bit smaller." "Well, not just that," Eli says, "but they need to be a tad higher, and then he'll be perfect," he said. Now you can tell that Sakura was very impressed with Eli and says, "By golly, you're right. Well, why don't we take the stitches out a little bit?" And so that's what both Eli and Sakura did, to make the ears a little smaller and a little bit higher, of course. So after Sakura thanked Eli for his help, and then she says, "I had to get some more materials for the bear's ears." But what she doesn't realize is that, for some unknown reason, Eli had just enchanted the bear's ear. So long story short, Chelsea says that she has a present for Zachary, her cousin. And when Zachary opens it up, he couldn't believe it. It's the bear that she made for her project, and she just gave it to him as a gift. So when Zachary looked at the stuffed bear that Chelsea had made, he was excited. And so Chelsea says, "If you don't like it, then I understand. I won't get my feelings hurt. Oh, and even better, you can even name that bear." So Zachary not only told his cousin that he liked it very much, but even better, he decides to name the bear right after her, Chelsea the bear. Now you can tell that she is very upset with this comment, especially from Zach. Now Lee, meanwhile, looked at the stuffed bear that he finished making, and he couldn't help but think to himself, why am I bothering making this anyway? Then flashback, we go back to the craft shop to where Lee was looking at Madison and Sakura, and they were talking to each other. And by the time that they were about to leave, that's when Lee saw the exact same toy making box as Sakura did. So what does he do? He decided to do the same thing as Sakura did, buy a toy making box. Then back to the present. After Lee looks at the bear very carefully and says, well, it was okay, considering it's his first time making it. But then suddenly, when Lee looked over his shoulder, he saw Julian, who said hello to him. When Lee saw that Julian had a lot of food that he couldn't eat by himself, he was in shock. And so Julian says, I'm about to have some lunch. You want to have lunch with me? Julian asked. So Lee says, sure, I would like to. So as Julian was climbing up the fence and has a bag of food in his hand, that's when he says, here, catch. So when Lee stepped forward, good thing for Lee, he caught the bag when he did. And Julian continues to climb until he finally makes it over the fence and joined up with Lee. So now that Julian and Lee are sitting together, Julian was busy eating while Lee just stared at his sandwich. Now Julian could tell that there was something off with him. So Julian wants to know, don't you like the sandwich I've made? Of course I do, Lee said. So Julian, long story short, being curious as he can be, he wanted to know from Lee if he could look at the teddy bear that he had just made earlier. And of course, Lee agrees. And so Julian went ahead and looked at it. So as Julian looks at the bear that Lee made, he said, And he wanted to know, did someone give it to you? And Lee shook his head no. Then Julian asked him, so you made this yourself? And Lee nodded yes, he did. So Julian made a compliment to say, well, this is great. Aren't you going to give it to someone? He asked. Well, Lee didn't answer. He didn't say a word. So instead of answering Julian's question, that's when Lee says, I have to go. And so after that, he ran off. So after, long story short, when Julian forgot that Lee forgot his stuffed bear, he runs to catch up with him. So anyway, back with Lee, who ran off earlier. So Lee continues to run and run and run and run until finally, long story short, Lee goes face to face with Yue, who is flying up in the sky out of nowhere. Now remember, he was the same person that Lee lost the final judgment to since episode 10 in the last season. But that's not all. Yue has Lee's stuffed bear in his hand, just like what Julian did. And of course, when Lee was face to face with Yue, he just couldn't believe it. He was in shock. Now Yue can tell that there was something off with Lee, so he says, I can tell that your Cloud Dynasty is in question now that all the cars have been caught, he said. So even though Lee agrees with Yue and that's indeed true, and then he pleaded his case to say that Sakura's their new mistress now. So even though Yue agrees with Lee of what he just said about Sakura being the new mistress of the cars now, he also said that's true, but your history in your role is about as important as it was. Well, that's true, Lee said to Yue, but then he asked a question. Where can I stand? What am I supposed to do about it? After Lee had pleaded his case to say that the cards are in Sakura's hands. Well, that's true, Yui says, but not just that, he also said that the fate is in her hands as well, he said. So before Yui can turn back into Julian, his last words to Lee is to say, Sakura needs your help in your magic more than ever, he said. And then after that, Yui turned back into Julian, who was Sakura's brother's best friend. So after Yue became Julian again, he looked around and he was very confused. So he says, how did I get here? What's going on? But then Julian says, oh, here you are, Lee. Oh, by the way, you forgot your stuffed bear. So Julian went ahead and gave it to him. Then Julian decides to make a suggestion with Lee and says, why don't you give the stuffed bear to someone? That would help a lot, he said. So, long story short, after Lee had thought about Julian's suggestion, meanwhile, Madison was asking Sakura, so let me get this straight. Eli helped you with your stuffed bear project? So, not only that Sakura told her best friend that he did, but she said, you know something? Lee's been acting weird lately. So, Madison has her turn to ask a question. What do you mean he's acting weird? I'm not sure, Sakura said, but Sakura, according to what she says in her case, she sensed that something was off. Also, as Sakura says in her case, she suspected that Lee has a lot on his mind. So Madison wants to know from Sakura, has she spoken with Lee about it? Well, Sakura says that she tried that, but every time she does, Lee runs out of the class so fast that she couldn't keep up with him. Well, Madison says in her case of what she told her best friend, maybe he felt guilt-ridden about it, about attacking you just the other night. Well, even though Sakura agrees with her best friend, but then pleads her case to say, I'm sure he didn't mean it intentionally. It just happens by accident. So Madison, although supportive, suggested to her best friend to talk with Lee the next day and make an assurance that it wasn't his fault. So Sakura, after thinking about her best friend's suggestion, she agrees with it. And then Madison asked a question, did you finish your project? She wanted to know. So Sakura not only said that she did, and so her best friend wanted to know, you're going to give it to Julian, right? So Sakura told Madison, well, now that you mention it, I think I will. Then Madison asked Sakura a question, then you wouldn't mind doing this favor for me, will you? So later that night at Julian's grandmother's house, and there's Sakura in her brand new dress and a hat to go with it, thanks to her best friend. Oh, and even better, Sakura has her new camcorder to replace the one that Lee had accidentally broken the last episode. But they're not alone. Kiro's with her and Sakura. Madison, that is. So Madison says, relax, you look great. Even Kiro agrees with Madison, and he too made a compliment. So when Madison was asked by Sakura why did she have to go through all this trouble making her a costume if she was just at Julian's grandmother's house? Then Madison, although supportive as she can be, just told Sakura, well, it's not just a costume, it's an outfit. And what better way to have an outfit is to have an occasion that goes with it. Of course, what's even better is that Sakura was planning to give the teddy bears a present to Julian. So before they can head inside Julian's house, in the yard part of course, that's when Kira was told by Madison that she needs to have her video camera replaced because it was accidentally broken the other night. Previously, of course. So anyway, before Sakura could knock on the door, that's when Madison wanted to know if she was nervous in any way. Sakura said no. So anyway, long story short, now that Sakura's at the front door of Julian's grandmother's house, she was hesitant of wondering what to do and what to say, where she can go from after that. Then long story short, just a few minutes later, that's when Kira was asking Sakura, are you sure you don't want to give him something to eat or something else? Well, she tells him, it's kind of late to be giving me some gift ideas, don't you think? So after a long story short, that's when Julian says, oh, Sakura is you. I'll go get the door. Meanwhile, back with Madison and Kirill, they found a place to hide right behind the trees, of course. So back with Sakura, she was staying in the front door waiting for Julian. Well, back with Madison, who's behind the tree, and along with Kirill, who's above her head, that's when Kirill was telling Madison, you know, if Sakura had to go through all this, all at least she could do is just give Julian something to eat, he said. Well, back with Sakura, she's still standing in front of the door. That was until finally Julian answers the door and then he sees Sakura. So after he opened the door, he says, oh, hello, Sakura. So after Sakura said hello back, she says, here, this is for you. And she gives him the wrapping with the bear inside of it. Now you can tell that Julian's in awe, so he asked Sakura, "Is this for me?" And she nodded and said yes. So he agrees from Sakura to open it up, and so he did. So when Julian looked at the bear very carefully and then asked Sakura, "Did you make this yourself?" "I sure did," Sakura said. "Gee, thanks," Julian says. "This will help a lot," he said. So Sakura, in omission by confession, just told Julian that she didn't do a very well job at it. But though Julian, being supportive as he can be, just told Sakura, "I think it's really nice," he said. So anyway, that made Sakura very happy when he said that. And of course, as time went on and on and on, and still behind the tree is Madison, she got it all on video camera. So Madison, although she pleaded her case to say that this is the best shot she's ever did, but Kiro pleaded his case to say, some food for Julian would have been nice, he said. So back with Sakura and Julian, that was until suddenly the bear started acting really weird. First, it started to levitate in front of Julian, and then before you know it, it grew bigger and bigger and bigger until finally at last it grew up to 50 feet tall. That's because earlier we saw Eli possess the bear by touching his ear, but Sakura was unaware of it. Let's not forget, Madison, who's Sakura's best friend, she saw what had happened and she was the first to witness it. So back with the giant bear, it started to attack Sakura with his big paw, of course. Kiro, back with him, when he saw what had happened, he transformed into his earthly form, but he's not the only one. Julian's doing it too. So now that Julian has changed into the UA, and when he saw that the bear's going to attack Sakura, he did what any person would do. He saved her, and luckily he did, just right after the bear went on to attack. So speaking of Yue, back with him and Sakura, who are now up in the air, now it's up to Yue to attack the bear the best way he knew how. But each time he did so, his powers, Yue's powers that is, doesn't seem to affect the bear in any way. Nothing happened. And if things weren't bad enough, Yue, for some unknown reason, just lost his wings, and both Yue and, of course, Sakura fell from the sky. So it's now up to Kiro to save them. And luckily, after he transformed into his earthly form, that's because, thanks to him, both Sakura and Yue are safe. So after a long story short, Sakura wanted to know how can a giant bear just block Yue's attack, and although Yue wasn't sure of it, watching it happen with Eli, Ruby, and Spinner. And of course, Ruby made a compliment to say, they do look out for one another. Isn't that cute? And of course, she isn't kidding when she said that. So back with Kiro, Yue, and Sakura, after Yue and Sakura had made it safe on the ground, that's when Sakura pleaded her case to say she felt the exact same force that when she did since the previous night when Lee was under some kind of spell. So even though Yue wasn't there that night, the moment that Lee was put under a spell, that's when he claimed his case to say he sensed it too. So Sakura wanted to know, is there anything that we can do to stop it? So Yue not only said that yes, that it will, and of course Sakura has the support of an insurance from Yue the best way that he knew how. So in Sakura's case, she just told Yue, then so be it. So then before she heads off, she told Kiro to watch over Yue and Madison for her. So although it's crazy as it seems, she has a plan to stop this giant bear. And so she ran off. So long story short, now that Sakura's face to face with the giant bear, one of the first things she did is that she does what she normally does. Use her star key and change it into a staff, in which she did. So now that she did that, one of the first things that comes to mind was to transform her jump card into a star card. So she thinks to herself, there's gotta be a way to stop the giant bear somehow. There's just gotta be a way. So anyway, now that Sakura had transformed the jump card into a star card, that makes it 4 on her list. And when the bear went on to attack, Good thing for Sakura when she did, she jumped out of the way. So back with Sakura, who just saw that Julian's house is about to be destroyed unless she does something about it. Then she pleaded her case that if something isn't done soon, then this is what's going to happen, and that's going to be a serious problem. And now here comes a bigger problem. In Sakura's case, she couldn't help but wonder how she's going to stop this stuffed bear for creating destruction. It is so big. So down below, back with UA, Kiro, and Madison, who watched it happen, that's when UA told Kiro to plead his case to say that whatever's doing it and causing the bear to grow so big and is so out of control. Then Yue told Kiro, I know this sounds crazy, but somewhere on the bear's body there must be a weakness. And Kiro agrees. So Kiro said to Sakura, Hey Sakura, I need you to find a weakness that where the source was coming from, he said. But where can I find it? Sakura said. Figure it out, Kiro says. It's somewhere on the bear. So once again, when the bear went on to attack, that's when Sakura dodges it. And that's when, before long, lo and behold, she found the weakness inside the bear's ear. And that's when she suspected that's where the source was coming from. So once Sakura knew that the weakness is inside the bear's ear, there's only one thing left to do: cut it off, as suggested by Kiro, of course. So, thanks to Kiro's suggestion, aha, Sakura knows what to do to cut off the bear's ear, and by how, you may ask? By using her sword, of course. So, just like what the old staff did, and just like the night before, Sakura uses her sword and by jumping up, of course. But that didn't work because when the giant bear raises his arm, it blocks the chorus attack. Back with Madison, Yue, and Kiro, who saw what had happened, that's when Kiro realized that the jump card is not going to work. What she needs is a flight card. He suggested this to Yue. So Madison, although she agrees with Kiro, but she says that there's only one problem. If she calls the flight card, then that means she won't be able to summon the sword itself. Now, Kiro, who agrees with Madison, and said, You're right, that is a serious problem. Both of the staffs can turn in both the staff that can fly and the sword itself. So back with Sakura, who was on the roof after Kiro had pleaded his case to say that there is no way that both the fly cord and the sword cord can be used on the staff at once. That's when she woke up, and again the bear went on to attack, but this time she jumped out of the way from the roof. So after a long story short that the top of the roof has been destroyed thanks to the giant bear, thanks to Kiro, he uses his wings to protect both Yue and Madison. So back with Sakura, since plan A didn't work for her, she figured she has to use plan B. So you're probably wondering, what was Sakura's plan B? To use the fly card, but she's getting worried. She said to herself that if she uses the fly card, that means her staff can get wings instead of the sword. And there is no way that both of them can be used at once. So, what does she do? She decides to use the fly card to transform into the star card, which she did. But then suddenly, something amazing happened. Instead of Sakura's staff being having wings, Sakura herself has wings on her back so that she can fly. That's interesting. And what's even more interesting is that now with her staff, she can now use her sword just like she did the first time. Of course, that was the third time she ever used it. So anyway, now that she can fly, she can now chop off the bear's ear with her sword, of course. And this time, she succeeded. So good news, her plan B worked. But that's not all. Something else happened. When Sakura chopped out the bear's ear where the source was, the bear grew smaller and smaller and smaller until finally it went back to its normal size again. But wait, there's more. something glowing just came out of the bear's ear, and when Sakura catches it, she looks at it very carefully. It's a purple piece of paper with a design on it, and it was the same design that the cards had. It belonged to Cloud Reed himself. She finds this really, really weird, and she couldn't help but ask herself, what was that doing in the bear's ear? So as Sakura, who is really confused and tries to figure out what was going on, watching it happen were Eli, Ruby, and Spinner. So Eli pleaded himself a case to say that's very impressive. So back with Kiro, Yue, and Madison, now that the bear's back to normal, thanks to Sakura, also good news for her, that's 5-star cards on her list. And this time, she didn't pass out. But then something weird happened, and Yue couldn't figure out what was going on. So while he was looking over his shoulder to find out what is going on, Kiro looked at him to ask what was going on with him. So Kiro asked him, is there something wrong? And that's when Yue noticed that the roof of the building was empty. So Yue, instead of answering Kiro's question, he knows something's off, but he just couldn't place it. So for Sakura, that's 5-star cards down, but there's still a lot to go. And so that ends episode 5.